Hello, everybody. Stephen Gray here, back after a hiatus in 2025. Wild times for the planet, indeed. And I am about to interview James Fadiman. Jim, to me, Jim Fadiman. Excuse me, James Fadiman, PhD, is one of a group of, or one of the great psychedelic elders and wayfinders. He's been involved in exploring and researching psychedelics for spiritual, therapeutic, and creative uses since the 1960s. Among Jim's many accomplishments, he's the author of the influential book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide from 2011, probably still selling well. He is a world leader in microdosing education and now has a new comprehensive guidebook, Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance, which he co-authored with Jordan Gruber. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Jim, I've always honored you, and you've been incredibly supportive over the years. That's always been much appreciated by me. So, welcome to this podcast, and let's get into some questions and answers.
It's a pleasure to be with you. It has been a long time. We do communicate, but not podcasty.
No,
And
this.
and also, I just love the idea of being a wayfinder.
Yeah, I just popped. I mean, that I just made this afternoon, and I popped. There must be a book by that title because the word wayfinder just popped into my
Oh yeah,
mind.
no, it's probably a practice
Ah.
by indigenous people around the world, and it translates into 82 languages, but not in English.
Right. Well, what came to mind for using that word for me is that you've been, on the leading edge of the wave on a lot of this stuff going way back to the 60s. Were you at Harvard when Leary and the gang were there?
Slightly before, except that Alpert was my favorite instructor. And it
Mm.
was Alpert who first introduced me to psychedelics a year after college when I was living in Paris.
Hmm. Oh, wow. Fascinating. Yeah, for people who don't know, well, they may not know either of his names, but he also changed his name to Ramdas at some point. So that was an incredibly fomenting time, obviously. Anyway, let's just get right into it, Jim, because I got a lot of questions for you that
Sure.
I'm hoping you'll share with myself and anyone viewing or listening to this. So right off the bat, this kind of give you lots of room to play with, I think. You say, or why do you say in the preface to the book that, pardon me, in the preface that this book contains, quote, potentially paradigm shifting information. So I was curious what you mean. In what way is this material have the potential to shift the paradigm?
Well, most of us who've been involved in psychedelics have been involved in what is now called high doses.
Hmm.
Till microdoses, nobody differentiated. And high doses are an extraordinary kind of breaking out of whoever you are and whatever you believed, including your own identity, um, whether you were ever born and will ever die, kind of large questions. And that's been the assumption is that's what psychedelics are. It turns out that we have discovered, as long as has every indigenous group we've come across, that using a very small amount of the same substance is a totally different uh, worldview, a totally different set of effects, and a real different paradigm. And it looks to us and to the researcher Connor Murray, UCLA, who kind of made this really explicit. If you consider the microdose, which we'll be discussing, the small therapeutic health creating dose without major visual and psychological and therapeutic and spiritual effects, it should be considered the way the substances are supposed to be used.
Really?
Overdoses have all kinds of what we would call side effects,
Mm.
have all kinds of difficulty, have all kinds of people get in trouble, people have terrible trips, people also make life-changing discoveries,
Hmm.
and usually need the kind of um, cocoon or the safety of ritual. They need leaders, people who know what is going on.
Yeah.
Just as when you have a guide on a trip through a rainforest, you are doing all the walking, but you don't really know where you're going or what you're going to
Mhm.
see or what to do with it. Um,
Yeah,
all of that is really specialized and quite remarkable.
mhm.
Uh, and it has a much smaller number of uses. The high doses simply have very, very few uses, fine
Mm.
uses, important uses, culture-changing uses, but they're not the full picture.
Okay. So when you say paradigm shifting, you mean paradigm shifting within the sort of overall psychological, I mean, pardon me, psychedelic sort of world,
No,
or just paradigm like planetary wise?
no, I think, well, one would always hope when one discovers something that helps people in many different ways
Yeah.
that it will be much more accepted.
Hmm.
If, as a paradigm shift in medicine, for example, uh,
Okay.
it looks like it can affect so many different physical and mental conditions that we are talking about a paradigm shift.
Okay.
The
Good.
pharmacological worldview is basically symptom based, and
You
that
bet.
medications are as narrow as possible, and they affect a symptom. They also have, and this is the greatest marketing coup of the pharmaceutical industry, they also have side effects.
You bet they do.
Now, as I read many years ago in an ad for, I think, naturopathic education, there are no side effects. There are only effects.
Mm.
And that shifts suddenly, wait a moment, does that mean all those little teeny things that I read about on the little insert that comes with my medication that says you can die of this, you can get heart disease, you can get diabetes, your feet can fall off? Those are effects. Those
Hmm.
come with this medication. I'm
Hmm.
being sold the medication for one of its effects.
Yeah.
So if you have something that has very minimal effects and has many of the beneficial effects of many different pharmaceuticals, that suggests a shift is possible.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so I would like you to define microdose and microdosing and actually kind of fold that into a second question from something I got out of the book. I think I got this from the book anyway. So the question that would kind of go with how do you define microdose or microdosing is what is the difference between subperceptual and subthreshold?
Sure. Well, let's do the first, which is a microdose is defined as a tenth to a twentieth of a recreational dose of a classic psychedelic. Classic meaning predominantly LSD and psilocybin containing mushrooms.
Hmm.
That means it's a small amount. And if it is taken correctly, it is maximally effective at a small dose. If a person gets beyond that small dose, the effects change, many of the benefits go away, and one is what we call high,
Hmm.
or just feeling a little high. So in a sense, it's self-defining what's an effective dose. If it's too little, it has no effect. If it's too much, it has effects that are not useful.
Yeah.
So it fits it basically for each individual within a range, there is an effective dose. And that effective dose may change within the individual depending on what they're taking it for and also depending on the rest of their life. So this
Hmm.
isn't I found the right dose for me and that's it for life. It's kind of
Hmm.
like I'm wearing a shirt. It fits correctly. 10 years ago it wouldn't, and probably 10
Hmm.
years from now it won't.
Yeah,
Um,
that's an
So I'm
interesting
finding
point.
the
Oh,
right
sorry.
shirt for the right time for the
Yep.
right occasion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting issue to me. And I've been around microdosing. I've used psilocybin microdosing capsules a bunch myself, off and on, and I've talked to a fair number of other people. And there seems to be a really wide range about what's the appropriate dose. I mean, I know one person who 15 milligrams is right for her, and other people maybe up to 200 or so.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
um, if you have ever worked in an ice cream shop, you would understand that. Okay. Now, what we do know, and in the book we say here is the range for most people.
Uh-huh.
and it's say from 50 milligrams to 300.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we have people like your friend who say the lowest that you're suggesting, 50, is way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And we have people who are using literally 1 milligram, 1/50th of the lowest dose,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the identical effects.
Okay.
We also have a whole group of people who say nothing happens until I'm at least 500.
Whoa.
And those are people, and we know now who they are. They are the high functioning autistic people, the people who
Oh.
are very smart and have problems usually with social relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So the human system is has a wide range of possibilities. So when we
Yep.
say here's what's the usual dose, that's because for 80 to 90% of people it is. Now, I
Yep.
didn't want to let subperceptual and subthreshold go unnoticed.
Okay.
Someone who I am sorry to say lives in my body came up with the word subperceptual early on, and it's a terribly wrong word.
Oh,
Subperceptual means you wouldn't notice.
right.
You notice most people, even in double-blind blah 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 studies,
Yep.
most people immediately know that they've taken something.
Mm-hmm.
So it is subthreshold, meaning it's below the threshold of any classic psychedelic experience, or so that if you look at the walls, they don't breathe. If you look at a rose, it doesn't look back at you and say some smart, sophisticated, philosophical answer to your question.
Beautiful.
So, so, the, so subthreshold means it isn't in the same. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it isn't a small high dose.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems is people who have taken a lot of psychedelics say, "Oh, goody, I can take a microdose and I'll have a small high experience," and simply that doesn't happen.
No. Okay. So, moving along, um, in the book, there's a long list of medications and supplements that are safe to use with psilocybin and LSD microdosing. Are there any medications in common use that are not safe with microdosing or for which there isn't enough evidence to risk it for some people?
Well, that appendix, which was developed originally by one of my research contemporaries and myself for a while, and then expanded and increased by the people in Holland, who, by the way, microdoses are legal in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And these are medications, supplements, etc., that people have basically written in and said, this seems to be no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a peculiar list because you will not find it that pharmaceuticals almost never discuss how they affect other pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, that's a weird thing.
So,
I've been
well,
aware of
it
that.
should be a necessity, but there's no financial incentive.
No.
But there's an incentive among the microdosing community to help one another. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a common question of, well, if I'm taking such and such, two questions. One is, will this help me get off of a substance that is not helping me anymore, like an antidepressant?
Mm-hmm.
Or I happen to like this particular medication I'm on. Will microdosing, cause it to not be as effective? And the answer, as far as we know, is microdosing doesn't seem to affect other medications because it's not a
Mm-hmm.
medication. So um, it's as if the question was, what medications are safe to take with vitamin C? And the answer is
Mm-hmm.
pretty much everything.
Yeah.
There may be a few things,
Yeah.
but on the whole, vitamins are considered generally safe and generally allowed with whatever else you're doing. Microdoses are closer to vitamins than really any other substance.
I like the idea of associating microdosing with vitamins. So that's an encouraging answer for anyone who might be watching this or listening to it who is on some other medication. So thanks for sharing that. I got a quote from you, or from either you or Jordan in the book, that goes, microdosing offers a proven tool to diminish and alleviate suffering from many physical and mental conditions. So the question that comes to mind for me, or came to mind for me when I read that is, how solid is the evidence? How much gold standard research has been done?
Well, let's look at the gold standard. But first, keep in mind that we went off the gold standard because it didn't really work very well.
Hmm.
The word gold standard actually should mean something that people used to believe in, but turned out not to be really very helpful.
Really?
And the gold standard you're speaking of is called double-blind studies.
Yeah.
Double-blind studies were only brought into public interest after a drug called thalidomide in the 1950s was
Hmm.
released worldwide without much testing on pregnant women.
That was a nasty one.
And it was not made available in the United States because one particular employee of the federal government said, we don't really have enough information, especially on women. But
Hmm.
around the world, people did take it because whatever it was good for, I think it might have been pain.
Yep.
It's terrific. But it also caused fetal abnormalities, and there were thousands of, of children who were born in terrible condition.
That's
So
right.
we then said, let's try drug safety. It's hard to imagine that we used to just say, well, if you built it and you sell it, it's probably okay. And we also remember we used to buy cocaine, we used to buy morphine. A lot of things were available in the drugstore.
Hmm.
So what we've found is that um, the gold standard for us, the best way to test whether something is effective is does it work on real people
Hmm.
in a real situation under real conditions? What is called, and it's a lovely technical term called real world evidence.
Hmm.
There's another kind of evidence which is called laboratory or clinical, or it's in a very restricted setting where you try and eliminate as many variables as possible. And that's theoretically that allows you to see it more clearly. However, it doesn't necessarily translate to the real world, which is why so many pharmaceuticals spend 50, $100 million getting developed to the point where they actually use it on real people, and that's the last you ever hear of it. It did fine with rats. It did fine with mice. It may have even done fine with monkeys. But the real test, so in a funny way, because microdoses, predominantly psilocybin, are grow in the world. They're
Hmm.
available.
Yep.
So what we have is a lot of evidence of its effectiveness that eventually interests the scientific community,
Hmm.
and they then do their kind of research on it because it is of such interest.
Yep.
Um, the opposite of a pharmaceutical, where no one ever can touch it until it's gone through the $100 million dollar
Hmm.
research paradigm to make it as safe as possible.
Yep. Yep. So the reason I asked that question is because um, in my very limited anecdotal knowledge, uh, the word the word on the street seems to be that microdosing psilocybin works for some people, but not for others. So,
Yeah. Well,
can you
let's look
speak
at
to that a
that.
little bit?
Yeah. What does that mean? What does works mean? Okay. The
Good.
reason that the book has so many subdivisions
Yeah.
is because if someone has um, migraine headaches,
Yeah.
that's not the same as someone who has neuropathy.
Okay.
So what if they both microdose and one says it works for me and the other says doesn't
Okay.
seem to work for me? The first question we would ask is what were you taking it for?
Hmm.
And if someone, and these are all real cases,
Yeah.
someone says, I hear you can get better grades if you microdose.
Mm.
And then the answer is we have, I don't know, maybe 50 to 70 people who have given us reports which suggest that that's true.
Hmm.
Does that mean it's true for you? We don't know.
Okay.
So what we're concerned about is what is the risk reward ratio?
Hmm.
How dangerous for how much benefit?
Right.
High doses, we know there's real risks and there's amazing benefits.
Yep.
Microdoses have incredibly low risks. Psychedelics are physiologically among the safest substances out there, and microdoses are therefore that much safer. And the rewards, for example, the person who says, I'm taking it to improve my grades, and then 4 months later they say, I was getting B's, now I'm getting A's.
Hmm.
So they find it was very effective at a very low risk.
Hmm.
This is why it's partially paradigm changing, because the problem with pharmaceuticals more and more is as they become more powerful, obviously their other effects become more powerful as well.
Yep. Well, that's good. So, in other words, you've accumulated a fair amount of information anecdotally, or however you would describe
Well,
that, on the
again,
various effects,
I've
right?
just got to stop you. Anecdotally is like a dirty word. That's
Uh-oh.
like second-rate information. Okay?
Okay.
And that's why it's used in I mean, if you say, well, how do you measure pain? Well, I just ask people how much pain they have. Well, that's an anecdote.
Yeah.
But if we take them into the lab and we wire them up and we actually, and this is true, the only way we measure pain is we ask people.
Hmm.
Not only we ask people, we ask them in the stupidest way because we don't have anything better. How much pain do you have on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, is your 1 to 10 my 1 to 10?
Mm-mm.
What are the chances? Very small. But that's what we use. So when you're microdosing, the question is very basically, how does it affect you?
Okay.
And is it in the direction that you want? And is it sufficient so that you either wish to continue microdosing or, and this is very important, one microdoses for a certain amount of time, a few weeks for a condition, and then you take several weeks off because microdosing seems to improve the body's capacity to heal itself.
Hmm.
And if there's anything we can say that we like about being human, it's we have an incredible capacity to heal.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay.
if that can be improved, then the question of what conditions does it improve becomes one that is of interest, but you're talking about a general healing of the system, improving of the system.
Hmm.
And that takes it out of the pharmaceutical realm, and it is closer to vitamins.
Okay. Okay. So I won't swear anymore by using the word anecdotal.
Please.
Yeah.
But you can see, um, we really forget how much in research is people asking people or saying, fill in a form.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how is that different from saying to them, if you meet them in the coffee shop, I'm running a little survey, could you fill in a form?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with you on the, I mean, I agree with you about everything you just said, but on the issue of trying to evaluate one's own pain, I've been asked that question before by
Of
medical
course.
professionals, and I don't even know how to answer it for myself, let alone anyone else, like on a scale of 1 to 10. So I think it was in the book you indicated that there are some reasons for people not to microdose. Could you elaborate on that?
We spend very little time on that. Um,
Okay.
Basically, yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to go look and see what we said because we're dealing with something that is incredibly safe,
Yeah.
has very small, has almost no physiological measurable effects.
Okay.
And um, it's kind of like saying, if are there reasons not to improve my diet? And the answer might be, well, I'll eat more calories, or I may
Uh-huh.
have used spices that are not tasty or whatever. But fundamentally, um, yeah, there is, I'm really kind of searching because I think I know the book very well. But
Mm.
what people say is, and it's a reasonable question, is there has to be some downsides.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, if it feels like it's not a good idea, don't do it. And
Mm.
if you are microdosing and you have a discomfort of any sort, I used to say just stop.
Mm-hmm.
But I had
Yeah.
this wonderful guy years ago. He said, I'm microdosing and it's awful. And here was this list of terrible things. There was headaches and stomach and pain. And I said, this is email. I said, you have to stop. He wrote back and he says, you can't make me. That we're in a funny position.
Oh, that's
And
funny.
I said, as a researcher, I have to tell you that if it's not working for you, you should stop.
Yeah.
Silence for 3 days.
Huh.
And I get a note. He said, I cut the dose in half and everything's fine.
Uh,
And that
Interesting.
led us to see that when people find they're having too strong a reaction or a negative reaction,
Mm-hmm.
that if they wish to continue, we say cut the dose in half and see if the effects you don't like go away.
Hmm. I think that's a really important one because, for example, I have a bottle right here with some 50 millimeter, 50 milligram, I mean, capsules, and I've been opening those capsules up and having half, and I've definitely noticed an effect on half. So yeah, there's this experiment with the
Right.
dosages, the message.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a little mantra which is less is enough.
Mm,
See, we have this kind of notion, and there's been a very sad piece of research that forgot this, is more is not better, and
hmm.
more is not the same. So
Is
we have
not.
there's a beautiful study where they were measuring the effects of microdosing
Yeah.
on ADHD, and they concluded after like a 2-year study and another 6 months to analyze it that it didn't help.
Mm,
We have a whole section in the book, it's one of our major sections of ADHD and how much it helps.
hmm.
And I looked at that and I thought, what happened?
Hmm.
You know, I have hundreds of reports and they're all favorable. And I know some of the researchers and I read it over and it was very clean. And then I saw it. They gave 20 micrograms of LSD.
Hmm.
Now, if you look in our book, we say 7 to 10 or 7 to 12.
Mm,
So they were overdosing
right.
everybody.
Yeah.
Then I read more carefully. I said, well, let's see. If the dose wasn't too high, then their double blind should have worked.
Hmm.
Out of 21 people who were dosed, 20 immediately knew that they were dosed. So the double blind was gone.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a hint that's too much. Then 5 people wanted out of the study
Mm,
because it was too much.
hmm.
So we had all this evidence that it was too much. But when you're doing a study in conventional science, once you start, in a sense, you can't stop unless people are really, getting hurt and sick.
Yeah.
So here's this beautifully designed study of how an overdose works. Now, that isn't the report they made. They said, well, it didn't improve ADHD. Now, they also didn't measure it when people were having the microdose in their systems or even the day after. They waited several weeks,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
which for which there was some rationale, which is it making a cure, which microdoses don't do? What they do is allow the body to heal at whatever level it does. So here was this beautiful study of overdosing. Unfortunately, it didn't have that title.
Hmm. Interesting. So you've mentioned both LSD and psilocybin a couple of times here.
Right.
Are there some meaningful differences between them for microdosing?
Well, let's go back to the really best science, because there's two wonderful studies on that very question. One is all physical, all of the physical things they could measure. And the difference between LSD and psilocybin, dose matched as well as they could, was that psilocybin didn't last as long.
Hmm.
Now, for anyone who's listening to this, they're saying to themselves, yeah, I knew that.
Hmm.
So that was like no discernible physical differences measured in laboratory. And then there was another study where they measured all the psychological uh, aspects they could, cognitive flexibility, memory, et cetera, et cetera. They found, and you're probably not going to be surprised by this time, that there was one major difference. Psilocybin didn't last as long. So if we limit ourselves to the scientific literature, there's no difference between psilocybin and LSD.
Hmm.
Now, if you should walk out into the street and yell that question, you will find that there's enormous agreement in the population of really millions of people who use these substances and have often for years, that there's an enormous difference between the two. And the difference is that what again, I'm remembering a young man in Los Angeles who said, in my group where we've used a lot of things for years, it's well understood that for questions of the heart, for questions that have an emotional concern or shape, part of it is that psilocybin seems to be a better choice because it's kinder.
Mm,
And then there's a discussion that when you're using actual living substances, mushrooms, that there is a living entity behind the plant.
yep.
But whether or not that is so, what this is what they say. They
Mhm.
also say if it's a more cognitive question, if it's a thoughtful question, if it's a philosophic question, if it's a math question. My favorite is a young man who said, I only microdose when I have a coding problem.
Hmm.
And he was talking about LSD.
Mhm.
Um, it seems to be better for problems of the mind. And that makes some sense because it's a synthetic. It doesn't have it's not part of the living world.
Yep.
And so it might be more sensible that it is more effective in the abstracted world. Now, what we find in terms of most of the physical conditions at the microdose level, um, they seem to work pretty well independently, so that most people don't have that choice. And what we found is when people use whichever one they have, the reports are quite similar.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah. Well, psilocybin for microdosing is widely available in the Vancouver area up here, but I'm not seeing much. There are even shops now that are selling it,
Right.
but I'm not seeing that for LSD.
No,
I
LSD is a synthetic. It's not an easy synthesis.
Uh-huh.
And since there are 200 species of psilocybin mushroom, and they grow on every continent, and in
Uh-huh.
most kind of temperate versus tropic,
Yeah.
um, and they can be grown in a drawer or in your
Yes.
closet, um, it has been displacing LSD.
Yeah. Well, that's how most of the psilocybin I'm aware of around here is grown, is in somebody's drawer or somebody's room.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard a couple of reports, obviously or apparently nowhere near enough to draw any actual conclusions, that some people find LSD microdosing a little more anxiety invoking. Is that possible?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Anxiety is actually its own little question, which is
Huh.
we find when people, we don't recommend necessarily that microdosing is the of choice for anxiety.
Mm.
Now let's break anxiety up a little. One is social anxiety.
Yeah.
Social anxiety, fear of public speaking, um, uncomfortable in crowds, um, hate going to parties. That's social anxiety. And go to parties because hopefully, someone will rescue you. Someone else who feels as bad as you do will sit in the corner with you. Microdosing seems to be very helpful.
Hmm.
And the case that comes to mind is a college student with social anxiety, and she said, I decided I would just give it a try. So I microdosed, and then I went to Walgreens at night, which I have
Hmm.
often done. And when I go to Walgreens, my hoodie is over, nobody can really see my face. I keep it down. It takes me forever to make any decision. And the idea of talking to the cashier, that's absurd. And she said, now with microdosing, I went and I didn't have my hoodie on the whole time. I chatted with people as I was going up and down the aisles. I've
Hmm.
made my choices quickly and easily, and I had a nice time with the cashier. See, that's a shift in social anxiety.
Hmm.
Now, there's another kind of anxiety, which is about everything.
Yep.
And what we see is for some people, it doesn't increase anxiety, but it increases awareness of anxiety.
Hmm.
And the difference between awareness of anxiety and anxiety is really almost impossible to measure or to even consider. So
Yep.
for so basically, if people are taking it for anxiety and it makes them more anxious, I think we've talked long enough so you can guess what we suggest.
Stop.
Right.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
go to a restaurant, say, an Indian restaurant, a really good Indian restaurant, and almost everything is a little hot, I will not return, not because it isn't a wonderful restaurant, because it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, well, as you say, the awareness, cannabis is like that too. It heightens awareness of anxieties, or that's what they often call, the
Well, here's the
paranoid
problem.
phenomenon, right?
The other problem with cannabis is there's a certain percentage of people who get paranoid.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's not anxiety. That's, oh my God, I'm feeling paranoid.
Yeah. Okay.
Just as no different from, oh my God, my stomach hurts. I
Right.
mean, they don't, when they're being feeling paranoid with marijuana or with cannabis,
Yeah.
they're aware of it as an effect.
Yeah.
And that such people usually are determined, you can tell who they are because they are no longer using cannabis.
Yeah. Well, I have my hypotheses about the source of that, but we won't go there.
Okay.
So, a sort of technical question here.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I saw this in the book or not, but I'm sure you're aware that there's things like the Paul Stamets stack where they
Oh, so
combine
yeah, let's
things like.
talk about protocols.
Okay, okay, sure, any way you
Now,
want. I
the
was
word
going to ask.
protocol,
Yeah,
which is high class for schedule,
yeah,
is how often do you microdose?
okay,
Now, this is again where we're going to leave the world of pharmaceuticals. Most pharmaceuticals are daily or even a couple of times a day
right.
because they're symptom suppressants. And as long as they're in the symptom is suppressed. Let's assume they're working.
Yep.
And as it leaves the symptom says, well, I'm glad you're gone. I'm coming back in.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there are certain classes of pharmaceuticals, um, antidepressants being the best known, where you take them forever
Yep.
because there's no intention of changing your system and of what we would call cure.
Yep.
Microdoses are not taken every day. There is a protocol which I originally developed for research, but it became quite popular, where you take a microdose on day one. You do not take a microdose on day two. You do not take a microdose on day three.
Hmm.
Take a microdose on day four.
Mm.
This is now considered the most conservative protocol because you end up taking it the least amount of times per month. Paul Stamets, and he and I are really good friends, developed an alternative called the Stamets protocol, which is 4 days taking it and then 3 days not taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he also developed another one called, which was 5 days taking it and 2 days not taking it.
Hmm.
I said to him, Paul, which is it? He says, you can't be too rigid.
Hmm.
And I thought, that's why I like him. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, there are other protocols like taking it every day, and then there are very specialized protocols for specialized conditions.
Right.
If you notice, each of these protocols has time off. And independently, and I had a lot to do with developing that first protocol, but it had nothing to do with this next piece, which is people around the planet, different groups which had much less in common, all decided that you should microdose for a certain amount of time, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then take several weeks off. Now, I don't know any pharmaceutical that suggests anything like that. And also, I don't find it in indigenous people. I do a little bit, but they're all the few I've met have also um, been working with people like me, so
Hmm.
that they are aware of the protocols. So why did that happen? Well, at first, when I was still just puzzling why I was even interested, uh, various psychonaut friends, it was very nice to have psychonaut friends because you can say, "Would you like to try?" And they say, "Sure." Then they say, "And what is it?" Okay.
Yeah, right. Especially when they're
So
young. Yeah.
exactly. So they would microdose, and then they would say, "Gee, I really felt good all day." And then the next day they would say, "I still feel good."
Hmm.
And a number of people um, began to say the second day is even better.
Hmm.
Now, what we know physiologically is the psilocybin has left the system.
Hmm.
It's the tiniest amount of residue, perhaps.
Yep.
This is the opposite of cannabis, which, as we know, lasts for weeks in the body. Um, So that was our first awareness that every day is too much or not necessary.
Hmm.
And so all of the various protocols have different times off.
Okay. But it's not a
So,
tolerance issue.
no, it might be
Oh.
because we do know with high doses, with psychedelics, if you take a massive dose on Monday and you see God, and you take a massive dose on Tuesday, you don't see God. You maybe see God's elbow. Okay. And if you take it on the third day, nothing happens.
Right. Yeah.
So you say, well, I'm going to take twice as much on the fourth day and nothing happens.
Hmm.
This, in some way, and I don't think of tolerance is well understood at all because
Yeah.
it's not physiological, your system says it's enough of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that microdosing avoids that possibility. And
Yeah.
there are, and it's, and also from a kind of very mechanistic point of view, it's a lot cheaper and a lot safer to do things that you only do as much as you need.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
seems to be a pretty good method of not overdoing it. And the
Good.
problem with overdoing a microdose, one is if you take too much, basically the healing effects seem to be minimized.
Hmm.
And two is it's waste.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I know nothing about the receptor issues with psilocybin, but with cannabis, for example, the tolerance effect is associated with the fact that the endocannabinoid receptor system gets full, and then the term I've read about that is called downregulation.
Right.
Yeah, but there's no knowledge about that, particularly with psilocybin.
Well, almost everyone that that we communicate with, it has it on some kind of protocol. So we don't
Yeah,
have people who take it. Now, I do know, again, there are specialized conditions predominantly dealing with pain where people take it more often, but
right.
usually not for too long.
Okay,
So
good.
we just don't have enough information to say whether tolerance can develop,
Okay.
and we really don't have much interest in in working there.
Hmm.
Since the idea of taking, if less is enough, that's optimum.
Yeah,
So
good.
you understand that my information comes from literally 12 years and thousands of reports.
Hmm.
So that when I say we have, that means we have a lot of reports. Now,
Gotcha.
we have some cases in the book where we only have one person, but it's so extraordinary and interesting that it's there because that's how science actually works, which is
Hmm.
one of something is an infinitely larger amount than zero of something.
Good one.
Two of something means that it isn't unique to that individual. And at that point, conventional science starts to warm up.
Hmm.
And we're really have been exploring what people tell us has been beneficial and what people tell us has not been beneficial. That's pretty much the limits of our interest.
Yeah. Now, when I mentioned Paul Stamets a few moments ago, I was going to ask you about stacking in the sense of combining other things like other mushrooms in particular, and sometimes, what was it?
Niacin.
Niacin. Yeah. What do you
So
think about that?
the classic Paul Stamets stack is psilocybin, lion's mane, which is basically a cognitive enhancer,
Yeah.
and niacin, which dilates the blood vessels so that the substances, literally the molecules can go everywhere in the body more easily. There is a little bit of research, big project done in out of Canada with I think 8,000 people, and there was enough people, so there were people taking all kinds of little tests over a couple of months, and enough had taken the Stamets stack and enough hadn't. So you could compare the two. And in a few cases of some of the things they measured, the Stamets stack people did better at a statistically significant level.
Hmm. I don't remember you mentioning that in the book, but like I said, I didn't read every word of the book.
Well,
Does that?
it wasn't, well, one of the major effects was what's called finger tapping. There's a
Uh-huh.
test that how fast, how many times can you tap your fingers?
Mm-hmm.
in 10 seconds.
Hmm.
Turns out it's among other things, older people can do it less fast.
Ah, no surprise.
So what you're testing with this large study is people started when they were had not taken anything, testing at what their finger tap rate was, and then every month or so there would be finger tapping. And the finger tapping improved in older people with the Stamets stack. Now,
Hmm.
the reason that our book doesn't cover it is it's hard to know. Nobody said, I really want to tap my fingers faster. Okay, so it's not a condition that people look for. That might
No.
be, it might be great for jazz pianists. I don't know.
Oh.
Um,
Well, it could
so,
be
so it's an interesting.
representative of
It
some other
suggests that the
abilities.
Stamets stack has definite effects, and we're measuring one curious
Uh,
little one.
right, right, yeah. One more practical question, if I may. Is there any preferred time of day to do this? Like, would if you do it too late in the day, are you likely to be awake too long at night or
That's
anything?
curious. And I was puzzled for a while because that was what I said. You take it like before 10 o'clock,
Uh-huh.
so it won't interrupt your sleep because you are energized more for the day.
Right.
And then people in Holland were being given microdoses for sleep disturbance. And I thought, that sounds nuts. And then, see, but I have a different way of dealing with it. So that's my science person saying.
Hmm.
My reality person says, how's it going?
Hmm.
And they said it's very effective.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I found out that people who microdose at night
Yep.
report better sleep and they're better the next day. So I
Yep.
looked at that and I thought, okay, and it took a moment because I had to let go of my rigidities. If microdosing improves the body's functioning, it should improve the body's daytime functioning if you take it in the daytime, and it
Hmm.
should improve the body's nighttime functioning if you take it at night.
Mm,
And
nice
we
one.
know there are all kinds of incredible, it isn't like you go to sleep and you're frozen and they melt you in the morning. There's a massive amount of physiological changes and shifts and refilling and emptying. There's a wonderful term, I think it's called brain waste, and that there's little things that come into your brain at night and scrub it all clean again,
Hmm.
so forth and so on. So all of a sudden I got, okay, if this actually improves functioning, it's no longer mysterious that it improves functioning in specific ways at specific times. Just as, I mean, let me give you a rather different one. This is from someone named Ben Greenfield, has a massive health program podcast and has explored every possible supplement and every possible form of exercise. He's just a miracle of a guy. And he was interviewing Jordan Gruber, my co-author, and I. And he said, I've been recently talking with long distance runners. Now, long distance runners are people who run more than a marathon. These are the people who do 50 and 100 miles. And I don't understand them, but they do that. It turns out, according to Ben, that the ultra marathon world almost entirely uses microdoses.
Hmm.
And Ben then started into an explanation of why that might be possible. But fundamentally, if you're running 100 miles, there are two things that worry you. One is endurance, and the other is pain. And if endurance is increased and pain is decreased, you're going to do it.
Hmm.
So it is, and it is found in a number of other sports as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, got to make sure I ask you more about this general sort of area of interest in the book, because it takes, for one thing, it's central to what people are going to be interested in, and for another thing, it takes up a large chunk of the page number of pages in the book, and that is, can you maybe elaborate on, I don't know, top five, top 10, some of the conditions that
Yep.
microdosing has shown the most promise for?
Well, not only the most promise, but some of them we have the most information.
Okay.
and it isn't because microdosing, attracts certain specialized areas, but if you look at what are the most common conditions that people go for medical help, mentally it's called depression, and physically it's called pain. Those are the vast amount of what people go for medical help.
Okay.
Depression for whatever reasons, and pain because there are so many different ways you can end up in pain. Microdoses, high doses, let's talk about high doses for a moment, which we haven't. There's lots and lots of research that shows that high doses alleviate treatment-resistant depression. Treatment-resistant depression, which sounds like it's the fault of the person they're resisting, but it isn't. It simply says that the antidepressive medications and therapies haven't worked. And even the manufacturers of antidepressants say 1/3 of people it will not help at all. So when people have had over years, and I've literally seen lists of 8 or 10 medications plus a couple of therapies, and they're still depressed, that's called treatment resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
High doses, there's about an 80% recover improvement, not improvement rate, but 80% of the people who do a high dose
Mm-hmm.
helping with, therapists and all the good medical things, marvelously are not depressed for a certain amount of time. And it
Yeah.
ranges from a couple of months to as long as they measure, which is by the way, in real science, they do almost no long-term follow-up because it's expensive. And also people go away.
Mm-hmm.
So we were curious about our own data that my friend who helped me design our first data, Sophia Corb. So we had about 700 people from about 30 countries, and a large number of them were interested in depression. And about 80% of them said that they had their depression had alleviated
Now this is with microdosing now.
with microdosing. So it's
Yeah.
very similar to high doses.
Yeah. Hmm.
And antidepressants, and if you are on antidepressants, you know about this. It doesn't make your life happier.
Mm-hmm.
It makes your life bearable.
Okay.
And literally, when you measure, you are less sad by sad things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Now,
So,
we
oh,
actually,
go
let
ahead.
me just finish because it's an
Yeah.
important shift. So when we measured with microdosing, and we were having people fill out like a 2-minute emotions form every day,
Yeah.
and it's a very common form. And we found after about a month that the subjects who were in this study had the same decline in sad. So they were
Mm-hmm.
less sad, just like antidepressants.
Yeah.
They were more glad,
Yeah.
which doesn't occur in the antidepressants at all.
Mm-hmm.
And what we would get, and this is the very most common report when someone has been microdosing for depression, I'm back.
Hmm.
Well, what does
Sweet.
that mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel the way I felt before I was depressed.
Beautiful.
Now,
Yeah.
that isn't the report you get from antidepressants.
No. Yeah. Okay.
So
So
that's one of the big ones.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, before you give me some more big ones, I'd like to follow up a little more on the
Yeah.
SSRI issue because would you recommend a particular plan or protocol for how to get off of an SSRI?
Well, actually, that's another one of the big ones. I mean, again, what we don't really recommend much. We just we're like kind of more like spiders, and we get people who fly into our web, and we say, "We'll let you go if you'll tell us what's going on."
Hmm.
So, what we find is that one of the major concerns that people have in our culture is how to get off of medications without putting yourself in serious danger.
Hmm.
And most of us, when we get a medication, there's a little teeny folded up piece of paper, and if you open it, it's in 8-point type, so you can't read it. But it has, among other things, all of the most frightening side effects, and it almost always has, usually in bold, what to do if you miss a single dose.
Hmm.
And the answer is usually take that next dose as soon as you can because you're in literal danger of having an overdose, kind of overdose reaction of what it is you're trying to prevent. So you will be hyper depressed if you miss it.
Yeah.
It's not a great system.
Mm-mm.
Microdosing, people basically microdose for depression. Now,
Yeah.
remember, we only get treatment-resistant people. We get the people that nothing works for.
Yeah.
If antidepressants work, people don't show up. So we're dealing with that part of the population which has already said that antidepressants don't work or are working so painfully,
Mm-hmm.
and the word that is used over and over again is, yes, I'm not depressed, but I feel like a zombie,
Heard that one. Yeah.
meaning I'm not because my glads have not, I don't have more glad.
Yeah.
So what we find in microdosing is people will take it for 3 or 4 weeks, then they will take those 2 weeks off, and then we have two groups. Some people say, that was great, thank you very much, and they get on with their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Other people say, when I'm not taking it for several weeks, I feel that my depression is coming back.
Hmm.
And I had this wonderful opportunity because I had told someone about microdosing, a woman artist in the Seattle area. And she then came back to me about 6 weeks later and said, I have a question. I love it. I'm very happy. And I told all my depressed friends, and a lot of them microdosed, and they were very, very happy. But there are two groups. And I said, what is it? She said one group did it for 3 or 4 weeks, took in their 2 weeks off, said, gee, I'm not depressed, and went on with their lives as I've described. The
Mm-hmm.
other group went back on.
Yeah.
And she said, what's the difference? No, how do I know? I'm sitting here, you know. Uh, and my thought was, that's terrific science. That's so cool. You've got two groups. It's worked for everyone, but for some, the effects are done and they're fine. The others, the effect doesn't last. What's
Yeah.
the difference? So I did exactly what you would do. I would say, what do you think? Because she knew the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked back and forth, and I kept saying, what do you see different between these two groups? And finally she said, I thought very wisely, she said, if I look at the people who stopped, their lives are working pretty well. If I
Hmm.
look at the people who are going back and needing another round of it, their lives aren't working as well.
Mm. Right.
So we don't know, among many other things, we don't know what causes depression. We don't know what brings it on. We don't know we have, the only way we measure it is we ask people.
Yeah.
Um, so again, the body gives you the information you need.
Yeah.
And if your body says it's important that I have another dose of this,
Yeah.
then you do. And if the body says no, then you don't. You don't assume that you're going to need this forever just because it's really helpful.
Yeah.
So again, it's very healthy at first to say, wait a moment, let's start by saying, even though it's in a capsule, it's not a pharmaceutical. And
Yeah.
then it is whatever it is for me in my situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, part of the question was, for example, there's a guy, I've forgotten his name, who's a doctor, an MD, spoke at a cannabis conference up here. His first name was Clark from somewhere down in the southeastern states. And he had a protocol for getting off of SSRIs, which was to go really, really slowly over about a period of
Oh, yeah.
about a
Yeah.
year or
Okay.
so.
Let's talk about, there's a term.
Yeah.
And it's important because, again, one of the major uses is how do you use microdoses to get off of whatever you're on that you want to get off of. And
Right.
it's the medical profession never says withdrawal. They have their own words called tapering.
Mm-hmm.
And tapering is exactly what this doctor was telling your group, which
Yeah.
is you take a little less and a little less because your body is used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take it away too quickly, your body doesn't know what to do.
Right.
It's kind of, if you're recovering and you're using crutches, you don't throw them away. You do use them less and less and less and so forth.
Yeah.
So tapering is done by and here's basically what we say. What we know, again, hundreds of reports, microdosing makes tapering easier.
Hmm.
It
That's
does
what I was
not
wondering.
eliminate tapering. And so
Yeah.
we say, whoever is giving you your prescription, you go to them and you say, I would like to taper off this medication. And they will say either you shouldn't or okay. And then you say, can you give me a schedule for tapering?
Hmm.
Whatever that schedule is, you stay on it. And if you microdose, what we've found is because these are people that said, I've tried 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years to get off this medication. I was never able to. But we
Yeah.
find with microdosing, it's easier to taper because
Beautiful.
think about it, you're no longer using this suppressing of symptoms, but you're also improving your health. So your body is better able to deal with the effects of not being on the medication. And so tapering is one of the major, ask for some of the Big Ten. That's one of the Big Ten,
Hmm.
is helping people get off medications that either never worked
Hmm.
or worked for a while or still works, but the other effects are just unbearable.
Yeah. Okay, so Jim, at the beginning, before we hit the record button, we both agreed that something about an hour is probably, the optimum length for something like this. I know there are more in the Big Ten, as it were.
Well,
Um,
let me go over a couple of the others and let's have a
okay,
few more minutes, which is the pain, because pain is totally different.
yeah.
What we find is, first of all, pain is of two sorts. One is you injure yourself, and that part of your body, the nerves are disturbed and so forth, and that goes to your brain, and your brain says, "Oh my God, I just put my hand on a hot plate." There's another kind of pain, much more often associated with chronic pain. So you've had a skiing accident, and your body, according to your physician and according to the X-rays and so forth, is healed, but you still have pain. That pain, we're now finding out, is generated in the brain and amplified back out to the body.
Hmm.
This is not my research, but a really
Yeah.
wonderful way of understanding it. Microdosing seems to do very well with chronic pain,
Nice.
but in two different ways. And this is again report after report. Sorry, let me get whatever I clicked. Hold on. Okay. Um, for many people, they basically say, my pain is less. And again, we measure pain the same way we measure depression, which is we ask, what's the number? And they say, I don't hurt as much, or I can now walk farther, or, I'm able to do things at the gym I haven't been able to do, or whatever it is. The other group, they say, if you ask them, how's your pain? They give you the same number. And they say, but it's very different.
Hmm.
And that's what we say. We say, because we're good clinicians. We say, And they then say, it's as if it's not as important.
Hmm.
And they change from being, I'm in pain, to my shoulder is in pain. And what they get is a kind of psychological distance from their pain. And they move from being a pain patient to being a person with pain. And we really haven't been able to explore it much more deeply than that. But that's the basic breakdown.
Yeah,
And for
that's
a lot of different pain, it just alleviates because if particularly if it's chronic and you don't need it. See, remember, pain is terrific. You definitely want something you want to notice when you put your hand on the stove. And we know there are people who don't feel pain, and one of the ways you can recognize them is their hands and arms are covered with spots because they
oh
haven't
no.
got the feedback loop.
Oh
Okay, so
jeez.
you don't want to lose it. But you also don't want to carry pain that is of no value.
Right, of
And
course.
that
Yeah.
seems to be more what microdosing is helpful for. So for things like neuropathy,
Yeah.
or uh, and there's a few wonderful miracle pain stories, but we're out of time.
Well, there is a lot more in the book, but what I'm hoping at this point is that someone who has not been familiar with the book up until now will have heard enough to know that this is going to be potentially extremely useful for them. There's a
That's
large,
the whole point of the book is that it's supposed to be useful. It's
yeah,
not entertaining. It's not the story of.
no,
It's not, it's not biographical. Um,
yeah,
but it is case after case after case for condition after condition after condition. many conditions that we don't have very good treatment for. And I'll
Hmm.
just give you one which is sad, but we have long COVID.
Yeah.
Long COVID affects in the United States several million people.
Mm.
And according to the US government, we're not doing very well at
Hmm.
knowing how to treat it because it's not symptom. It can be any part of the body.
Yeah.
There's a number of cases in the book worth reading,
Hmm.
things
Yeah.
like that. So it's really a useful book. It's a kind of stand at the bookstore, look at the table of contents, see if there's anything that you want to know more about, and realize you're probably going to have to buy the book in order to really understand it well enough for your own health.
Well, I see it as the kind of reference book that people are going to have on their shelves for the rest of their lives,
Yeah,
frankly. Yeah,
that's what I
absolutely.
use it for.
Oh yeah. No, it's unparalleled, really, it is. Um, okay, well, good to leave it there.
Let's leave it there.
Okay. So, would you, however, just stick around for a minute or two after I cease to record, just so we can have
Certainly.
a casual goodbye
Sure.
or whatever? Yeah. Okay. So, I'm going to end it here and just thank you very much.